This is a presentation that we've been actually working on for quite a few years. Years ago, Paul Fritz and a group of us brought an organization to Santa Rosa to sort of talk about the productive value of housing and land use policy that was going on. I was on the commission for 6 years, and so it was of great interest to me to understand how we could compare various systems within land use policy, but also the policy for you council members, because I actually think most of what we do and most of the policy comes through as land use policy. So it is rather a dry explanation here, or title to the, but that was the one Jen picked for me. It was not the one I picked. So, you know, what does economics have to do with land use? I'm going to use as a case study here the city of Santa Rosa. I'm not picking on the city of Santa Rosa, but it's the one I know best, but I've also worked throughout the region. And there is a long history in Santa Rosa of land use policy that's got us from where we were to where we are today. And so this is Santa Rosa back in the, the 1860s, let's say. And you can see here's Santa Rosa Creek and Matanzas Creeks, and that sort of defined the southern boundary of our city. And you can see that Santa Rosa was very compact development with agricultural land surrounding it. And that was sort of the basis of how most cities grew. You had the value of your community sat in the center, and transportation systems weren't really there, and so compact development was the way we did things. Santa Rosa, as it started to grow up, it even put in light rail systems. There was a trolley system that went in downtown. This is looking east on 4th Street, and you can see how compact development started to occur. You had a transportation system running down the middle of the city. You had small-scale development that was built at the time. The technology is allowed to go 2-3 stories. You had residential above, retail below. This was sort of the way every little community across the country developed. Natural disasters changed the paradigm of how cities grow. This is the Courthouse Square in downtown Santa Rosa, fell over in the 1906 earthquake. And so if we jump forward many decades now, we start seeing a development pattern that starts to change. The National Highway System started putting highways in. You have Highway 12 and 101, and now you're starting to see the growth patterns of Santa Rosa start to spread out. And why did that happen? Well, it happened because in the 50s, a lot of you know this, but I'm going to go through it because it informs what I'm going to talk about later. So the National Highway System, which is also a defense system, which went up in the 50s, started putting highways across the country. And it was designed to sort of build the economy. It was also a national security issue. It was Dwight D. Eisenhower that did that. And so highways went up, and they were relatively inexpensive to put in. But then they started to become complex. And as they became complex, they became more expensive. Then they became extraordinarily complex. And the cost of these systems were never sort of incorporated into the idea of this original idea, which was to sort of move the economy around and people as well. So this is the development pattern that began because of that. Because you now had a highway system that allowed people to move easily. This is after the war now, so the economy's starting to boom. The middle class can afford cars, and that's what you needed to get out to these. You can absolutely see agricultural land, and as you started to encroach on that. These are development patterns that we've all seen. This is a very familiar way in which America grew. This right here is a classic example of what went wrong. You know exactly why this development is here. Here's the highway system that was all in place. And some developer found some very inexpensive land, and he went and put a development out there and built a whole entire road system. And then, obviously, the sewer, water, power, the whole public safety system had to be expanded in order to serve this. I don't know where this is. It doesn't matter. You can look at this and see this is the wrong way to do things. But let's go back, because I'm going to start talking about sort of the lead up to where we are. This is actually Boston at the turn of the 20th century. So Boston was growing. A lot of people were immigrating into Boston. It was a growing economy. They actually had a trolley system that moved through it, but you can see it's total chaos. This is probably 7 or 8 private trolley operators that are operating in here. And you can see this poor little individual here trying to figure out how he's going to get across to that store right there without getting killed. And a lot of people were being run over, and there was a lot of problems with that. And then an innovative mayor came in, a young, innovative mayor, and he said, the streets aren't for that, the streets are for the people. And you can see they did a subway system, there's the entrance to the subway, and all of a sudden, the community, the value of the community was expanded because all of a sudden people took over as opposed to this sort of transportation system. And you can start seeing the development starts to occur too. This also sparks the economics of those areas when all of a sudden people can get to places easier without dying. That's an important thing, to not die on your way to the store. So there are lessons that could be learned, and this is sort of a presentation about the lessons we didn't learn. Because now you jump forward decades ahead, and this is the Katy Highway outside Houston. So Houston kept growing the way everybody did. They just expanded. They had no zoning code. They just put houses where they wanted to. They had a highway system, so why not use it? But it started to become so impacted, you can see, traffic. And they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to figure out how to solve that problem. And they came up with this brilliant idea to spend well over $1 billion to create this, which was 26 lanes of freeway. Now, it was about $1.3 billion this is several decades ago. But what was not calculated into that was how are you going to pay for that, the operation and maintenance of this system over time. This is billions of dollars to operate and probably now trillions of dollars to replace, and it is going to need to be replaced. We know now that all infrastructure fails eventually, and what is the funding mechanism that allows them to pay for that? Well, it'll be huge subsidies from the federal government and from the state government of Texas. So let's come back to Santa Rosa. This is looking south. It's Mendocino Avenue looking south through the old courthouse. So the same thing happened back in the early 60s. So this is in the late 50s, early 60s. This was a more compact downtown. At least we had resources and services in the downtown. In the 60s earthquake, that was damaged, and so they tore it down. And so there was a policy decision. There was a land use decision that was made at that time when that courthouse came down. Was, are we going to rebuild in the downtown, or are we going to do what actually happened, which was you take the courthouse out, you put 4 lanes of traffic through, you split the courthouse now into 2 smaller little mini courthouse squares, and eventually this just became another thoroughfare, 16,000 cars at its peak that went through downtown, not to downtown, through downtown, because the downtown started to fail. And that sparked, a little later in the 70s, this. So this is looking west on 3rd Street. That's the mall under construction in the 70s. So the entire sort of development pattern of downtown and the use of land, which we'll go over in a little bit, of the value of using very precious land that we have left. This is about 30 acres of our downtown. We have about 100-acre downtown, so this is a third of our land is being used for the mall. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not here to say one way or the other, but we'll have a conversation about what that means. So, looking down, we have 101. We have the mall, and then here was the courthouse before it was unified. The reason I'm showing you this is because there was a land use decision made at one point where they elevated 101. 101 used to be at grade. They elevated 101 so that there could be a connection between downtown Santa Rosa and Railroad Square. Railroad Square used to sort of be considered Skid Row because there was no way to get across 101, at least not safely. Again, die on your way to a restaurant. So they elevated 101, and then later on they put a mall in between it. And that mall blocked the ability of people to walk through 4th Street down into Railroad Square if the mall was closed, which it closes at 9 o'clock, and now all of a sudden you're having to navigate yourself around the mall. I sat on a panel, a planning and development panel with this was years ago, with the then mayor. And we talked about this, and I brought up the unintended consequences of what happens with land use policy and what it can do to the economy. Because what this did was it destroyed businesses in the downtown. And what the mayor said was, well, it was the right decision at the time. And I understood what he meant. There was a revenue problem with the city. We didn't have money, and the notion of putting this enormous mall in there with construction jobs and then sales tax and then property tax values, because the land wasn't very valuable until the mall went in. So it elevated. It did provide some economic gain for the community. But I want you to remember this notion of it was the right idea at the time, because that's, I think, where we get into problems, is that we are now dealing with the problems of the mall. This isn't to knock the mall in any sense other than to say that, is this the most productive value of the land that we have in our downtown? And are we getting what we need to out of this kind of development? So, you know, the sort of the sustainability model is, I call it the three legs of the stool, but it's really about the economic strength of your community. And so I've been here long enough now, and I didn't come far. I moved from Marin County to here, so I could afford to live. I couldn't afford to live in Marin back when I got out of school. So what Sonoma County has been very clear about is that the environment is important. So urban growth boundaries, the preservation of ag land, existing ag land, and now the implementation of development strategies that are sustainable. We're all having that conversation now, but that's a big important part of who we are. So we don't just grow out anymore. At least that's not the intent of what we do. There's the second leg of the stool, which is the social equity piece. You know, the equity in the delivery of housing options for all of our community, not just individuals within the community. Equity in the delivery of health services. And I would say that compassion and empathy in the way in which you craft policy. You have to think about this as a community, not about solving one problem or the other. And then the third leg of the stool being the economy. You have to pay for all of this stuff. And the way we do that, well, let's go back to this is the Santa Rosa's budget priorities. If you look at the top 5, deliver housing for all, reduce homelessness, ensure health and safety, promote economic vibrancy, and build and maintain sustainable infrastructure. That's the 3 legs of the stool. The question now is, for all of you, is how do you effectively do all of this, balancing the stool? Not just looking at the economy, not just looking at the environment, but looking at how you can do all of that and include social equity as a part of that. So the general fund budget for the city of Santa Rosa is about $197 million. This is where most of our money comes from. Sales tax, which I will tell you is a very volatile way to get your money. You can see it right now. 2 years ago, we had a $100 billion surplus in California, and now we're projecting a $69 billion deficit. That's because when you have an economic downturn, people stop buying stuff. Property tax is one of the most stable ways in which we get money, because property tax values don't fluctuate that much. They will. 2008, when the entire world economy collapsed, property values did drop. But in general, property tax is pretty stable. There's other fees you can see over here. There's license fees, permit fees, development fees that make up the rest of this. Here's where our money is spent. This is pretty typical of a community. Over 60% of it goes to public safety. Then you got about 10% to take care of your parks. And public works, which takes care of all your streets and curbs and gutters, and that's about 17% of the budget. So if you look at the downtown core Santa Rosa, this is also a very common ratio. The gray is the stuff that's non-taxable. So that's your streets and your parking lots and all the non-taxable elements. And all this other stuff is stuff that you can tax, businesses and residential. And so this ratio is pretty normal. So now let's get to the productive value of the land. So in 2016, Paul and a group of us brought Urban 3. It's a data analytics firm out of Asheville, North Carolina. And they had this interesting way of being able to compare productive value of land. And they called it the taxable value per acre. So as an example, you've got the mall, Cottingtown Mall. Let's start with that. So it's got a bunch of buildings that make up the mall, and then it's got a vast parking lot that surrounds it. So the buildings are taxed at one value, higher value. The parking lot, especially a surface parking lot, is taxed at a significantly lower value. So you take the aggregate of all of that and you divide it by the acreage that it takes to support that. So the parking lot and the buildings, you take that total aggregate and you divide it in and you get a value per acre. Now we can start comparing productive value of land. The Cottingtown Mall is at about $2.2 million per acre. You go downtown to the Plaza Mall, you know, it's a little more valuable building because it's a two-story building. It's got structured parking around it, which is appraised at a little higher value than a surface parking lot, but lower than a building. And you take that aggregate value and you divide it by the 30 acres that it takes to support that mall. And you're at about 4.2 million acres of value, or value is essentially the taxable value per acre. So every community gets an increment of that that comes down to them. So what do you want? You want that taxable value to be up. Obviously, if you want to pay your bills, you've got to start finding other ways to bring revenue in, and more efficient use of your land is the way you do it. At least that's what I think. So let's look at some other apples to apples comparisons now. 442 8th Street is about 2 blocks from here, right over there. There's a little two-story building in there. It's got about 12 or 14 apartments in it. It sits on about 6,000 square feet. If you take that taxable value as it sits now and divide it by the fact that it's, you know, less than a quarter acre of land, that project over there as a value per acre is at about 4.6 million. It's doing just about as well as the mall. You go right across the street at 526 B Street. You now have a 3-story building. This sits on 6,800 square feet. So still, we're under a quarter of an acre of land. It's 3 stories of apartments. It's also a building built in the 1920s. You take the aggregate value of that, you divide it by 0.14 acres, and you get $8.5 million of productive value per acre of that project. So this thing is now, this one is punching way above its weight. It is bringing in more value per acre than the mall. And we always think of these big developments as the ones that are bringing us the greatest value. This little puppy right here, it's actually 533 5th Street, there's a typo. This sits on 3,000 square feet. It's a 3-story building. And it's punching up at about $11 million of value per acre. This is just a graph that kind of looks at, you know, so here's the malls. That's the outlet mall actually down in Petaluma. Target, Costco. You know, you can see all of these are running at about $1.72 million of value per acre. You go to this end, here's the Burbank. This is a Hugh Futrell project over on 7th Street. It's 5 stories. It sits on a quarter acre of land. It has 24 units in it. It's got tuck-under parking. It sits right on the edge of an historic district. It beautifully fits in, and it's punching up at $28 million per acre, the value, the productive value of that land. That's money in the coffers of the city of Santa Rosa. But every one of these is a small development. These are not huge developments. The Railroad Square Terraces has been there for years, and even that, and that's the same thing. It's a multifamily project in the middle of Railroad Square. You probably walk by it all the time and don't even know it's there. So one of the questions that then comes up is when you're sort of comparing commercial to residential is, well, what about the retail sales tax that you get out? So we have this little slide here to show. We're just going to go to this one because it's the mall. So if you take the retail sales tax that comes from the mall to the county and you do the same math equation, which is divide it by all the land that it takes to support that retail sales tax, it's coming in at about $54,000 per acre. You add that to the 4.2 million, and you have not significantly raised the value of that, the productive value of that land. by combining both property tax and retail sales tax. And I realize there's jobs in there. So it's not, this isn't some metric that says, here is the hard and fast way in which you should look at things, but it is certainly a way in which you should evaluate and analyze land use. And there's a certain question about the kinds of jobs that are in national retail chain. So this is a heat map that shows the city of Santa Rosa. Here's Annandale. So the gray is it's non-taxable. Here's Oakmont out here. So you see this big spike, and everybody always thinks, oh, that's the mall, that's the big, the big engines of the community. These spikes are about the productive land value. So the value per acre, sort of between the $8 and $13 million per acre of land value. This is not the mall. This is those little projects I was showing you. The mall is right here. So it's not that it doesn't provide something to our community. I'm not saying that, well, let's just tear down all these buildings. What it is saying is we made land use decisions in the past, and we are running out of land for a good reason. We put urban growth boundaries in place. We do not want to build into those. And so we need to look at this in terms of its productive value now. And so that's what this is trying to show you. This is the downtown of Santa Rosa. It's the downtown of any one of your communities. That's where you should be putting the most productive value in. So I'm going to do a side-by-side case study here. So this is a single-family, small lot subdivision on the north side of Santa Rosa, just off of Piner Road. It's 118 units, and it sits on about 15 acres of land. I was actually on the Planning Commission when this one came through. So what do you think the productive value of this is as you look at this? It's coming in at about $5.5 million per acre. So it's doing better than the mall. But let's do a comparison here. So this is a project that's approved. It actually sits right there. There's a little surface parking lot right there. This is a project we're working on with a downtown developer. He actually owns this building. He's Jen and my landlord. It's 8 stories, multifamily, 118 units, and it's sitting on a 1/4 acre of land. This is real. This is an approved project. As soon as the interest rates come down and construction costs come down, we're going to build this. So let's do a comparison of the productive value of these two. $140 million. This is real money now. This is the difference between this development type and this development type and the value. This is the money that's coming into the coffers of your communities. And you don't have to do 8 stories. I realize some of you are in smaller communities. You don't have to do 8 stories. I showed you what you could do with 3. This is a big deal. In my mind, Paul and I have been fighting this battle. He's on the Sebastopol Planning Commission. This is something we've been fighting for a long time, because looking at this and understanding it is important. Michael Bloomberg, when he was the mayor of New York, said, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. He also had this other mantra, show me the data. So if you look at this development type right now, and I approved it. I approved it because it checked all the boxes for everything that we asked for. It hit the zoning, it hit the density, it hit everything that we asked for. The developer came in and brought a project of which we asked him to do. So I'm not knocking the project. I'm just saying if you were to look at the productive value of it. So when this project came in to the city of Santa Rosa, and I was on the commission, every staff report for every development comes in the very last section of it has this little section that says fiscal impact of the city. And I've never seen other than a one-word answer to that for every staff report, which is none. You've all seen it. So there's literally no fiscal impact of the city for this project. So I had been working at this point, I had learning Urban 3 tactics, and I had been understanding a little bit more about the true cost of development. So I asked, who's paying for all these roads? These are roads that are coming in here. There's curb, gutter, sidewalk, street lights, there's sewer underneath it, there's water underneath it. And the answer, of course, is always the developer pays for it. Of course he does. It's a capital expense. It's part of his pro forma. He pays for it. So then the next question was, okay, now you've given him his occupancy. You've turned over, the project has been turned over. And all of that, now who takes care of that infrastructure? The city gets it. So then the question I had was, how do we pay for that? How do we pay for the maintenance and operations of that system? And in the future, how are we going to pay for the replacement of it? Because as we know, infrastructure, no matter how good you take care of it, it's going to deteriorate. And the answer was always, well, we tax. Every time I ask this question, we tax every one of these homes. There's property tax associated with it in a Prop 13 state. So 1% increase maximum every year. So they pay their property taxes, that increment goes into the general fund, and then that little 17% that you saw for Public Works O&M budget, that goes to pay for this. So then the question is, so did we ever do the analysis to see whether it's this cost and the maintenance and operations and replacement of this is covered? And the answer is always no, we haven't done that analysis. And I'm not picking on Santa Rosa. Nobody does this analysis. So if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. I would say I would change that because we can measure this now. We have so much data. We know how to do this. If you don't measure it, you can't manage it. So how do we make land use more efficient? Well, you incentivize development where public investment is. That project I showed you that's going in, we have infrastructure already here. The sewer's in the street. The water's here. The power's here. Everything is already here. Public safety is here. So incentivize development where you've already made your investment. Because if you start sprawling out, if you even one little development that extends that out, that's more cost that you're taking on. And if you haven't analyzed what that is over the next 30 years, then you haven't done the measure it so you can manage it. Smart Rail is here. SMART is here. It's an $800 million, I think, investment at this point. We need to capitalize on that. There are problems, the last mile issue. There are things that we need to do, but we need to figure those problems out together, not just say, oh, well, let's scrap an $800 million investment. So focus development around there, and a lot of these communities are. Santa Rosa does a fantastic job of incentivizing and pushing development into the core, close to the rail stations. Protect the urban growth boundaries. We renew those every 10 years, and every 10 years somebody comes and says, oh, look at all that land out there that we could go develop. We could put housing out there. We could extend the roads. We could extend the public safety. We could extend all the problems that we talk about. The loss of environmental barriers around our community are gone if you don't protect those. Protect those boundaries. Build walkable and bikeable environments, and that's because walking and biking is an alternative transportation system. You know, it's not just cars or the train. People will walk if you build something next to something that has value, so do it. Stop designing the public spaces that's for the car. We do that we still do this. We've got to stop doing that. We have to start thinking about pedestrians and bicyclists and kids. And then this is the land use part. This is the policy part. You have to start passing policy that addresses the economic sustainability for future generations. We are saddling problems. We are dealing with problems right now that were made 40 years ago. That's why a lot of communities have budget deficits, that they cannot support this. The crumbling infrastructure is all around us. I always like to show this. This is a Danish artist who did this drawing of the relative danger of walking within most cities. You know, here's the road system, and it's just a really graphic expression of how dangerous it can be to just walk around. We still have people getting killed in crosswalks. Bicycles are killed every year. So let's start designing cities that focus on the interests of people, not cars. Let's start quantifying the productive value. Let's start doing the analysis so that we can understand what the very precious land we have left, what's the most productive way in order to use that land. And let's incorporate that into the policies of every community in this region. That was a group we brought. So we worked with Urban 3, and they're still around. They're still a great organization, and they do those heat maps. Yeah. And if you want the information, I will give you whoever you need to talk to. They're a great, great organization. Everybody should be doing this, by the way. Every municipality should be doing this. You shouldn't be building a general plan, updating a general plan, unless you're incorporating this stuff into it. It's not that hard.
We still have our website is still up.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Community partnership.
Yeah.
There's actually more information about the study. It's more.
Yeah.
We actually did another kind of follow up in Windsor.
Yeah.
I know we have one question from Councilmember Bagby.
I wonder if you would comment on, now that we know that we have the funding for Smart to Windsor, especially since, Windsor really created a dense downtown. Just what I think it's just going to absolutely explode Windsor off the map. I think it's their prescient, forward-looking, dense downtown when the train comes is just, I think that's probably where like the bulk of Smart's ridership is suddenly going to come from. So just was wondering if you could kind of look at it through that lens that you were talking about, is of where transportation actually meets the kind of land use planning that that was built with transportation in mind. And what do you think is going to happen?
Well, Windsor has done everything the right way. And they have two major projects that are within walking distance of where the train will eventually come. Thank God it's finally coming. And so it was prescient. It was, I mean, these are concepts that have been around for a very long time. I'm just trying to quantify it in a way of showing what you can do. Don't start downzoning things. I mean, we hear this all the time. Oh, well, let's take this from sort of medium density to lower density because we don't want to make the current residents unhappy. But you can see that with very little density, I mean, I'm talking 12 to 24 units per acre. This is almost 300 units per acre. So I'm not talking about that kind of density. What you're doing up there is that you're going to have somewhere in the vicinity of 900 families, so well over 2,000 people who are going to be close to that rail, close to your downtown. It's the right. It's, the policies are there. Follow them. That's all I'm saying, because there is a lot of pushback at times. The policies go in place, and then I saw this on the commission all the time. The policy's there, the project comes in, and then the neighbors come out and complain. So that's why you get your general plan right, you get your data right. If you measure it, you can then manage it. And then when those arguments come out, you have some way of pushing back on that. And you have to push back. It's the job of leadership. You got to make the hard decisions. And these communities, we've been doing this for years now. All these general plan updates are supporting this kind of idea. It's when the projects come in that they start to wobble, and we start to downzone. We start to, in order to negotiate through a situation, we start making them less than what they should be and what they intended to be, what they were intended to be. So you got to stick to your guns.